And this year, you've agreed to come and give a keynote. We're really getting our money's worth out of you, aren't we? But I have loved your work, Gail, and I like the approach that you bring and how your work over the years has really rattled the cages of many of the established hegemonic ways of doing research. And you always bring your own life in to challenge things, and you don't stop when people say, oh, you can't write like that, you can't include that. And I'm just really excited that you're going to speak with us and for us this afternoon. So can I ask you to give a big hand for Gail Leatherby?
I'm so glad company this afternoon. As I've said in this space and elsewhere, I've come to realise that much of my research and my writing is about love. As Bell Hooks notes, there are not many public discussions of love beyond the romantic erotic in culture. Like her, I am interested in more than romantic and or erotic love. That is non-sexual love between individuals and in living by a love ethic, with love embedded in the commitment to social justice. In reflecting on the place of love with reference to sociable solitude, I consider the significance of cultural, social, emotional and network capital, and also attempt to unpick at least a little the complex personal and political relationship between life chances and choices. My intention then, with the conference theme of murmuration in mind, is through an autoethnographic lens to outline and explore some alternative ways of being and moving with others. My consideration of love is perhaps most explicit in my work on non/mothering and motherhood, and on death, loss and grief, two areas of autoethnographic interest that I have researched and written about for 35 years. But in other areas too, including that of working, learning and being in higher education, and of experiences of solitude, love also features in my academic work and in the fiction and the memoir that I write. I live alone. Both my parents are dead. I'm childless, a widow, no siblings. I miss very greatly the loved ones I have lost, but their continuing social presence in my life, along with the physical presence and actions of significant others, enriches my daily experience and imaginations. I am happy with my life at present, but I have many more plans and ambitions that I hope to fulfill. I enjoy solitude. I love the company of others. I find pleasure in my own space, in being alone, and I rarely feel lonely. I recognise my privilege and acknowledge without a past and present loving relationship of others, I might feel very, very differently when I am without company. More on all of this now. But before continuing, I need, of course, to acknowledge that not only is my story influenced by memory, or the lack of it, but also structured by my own particular social, political, and economic history, as is my choice of photographs and images. As my title suggests, I believe that the connectedness thesis, which stands in antithesis, I find all these words really difficult to say, to the individualization thesis, is more relevant to my story. So, as Carol Smart argues, the connectedness thesis sets the sociological imagination off on a different intellectual trajectory than the one indicated by the individualization thesis. With the latter, one is directed towards gathering information and evidence about fragmentation, differentiation, separation, and autonomy. This tendency needs to be counterbalanced by an awareness of connection, relationship, reciprocal emotion, entwinement, memory, history, and so on. Connectedness as a mindset encourages inquiry about all kinds of sociality and seeks to understand how association remains both positive and desirable, as well as how it may take different shapes at different times. So what does all of this have to do with sociable solitude? It was during the first COVID-19 lockdown that I began to think seriously about the meanings and experiences of solitude and also of loneliness. Norman Denzin describes problematic, disruptive, life-altering events that lead us to new understandings of ourselves and our relationship to the world as epiphanies, and this seems relevant here. My personal story of self as a woman living alone, when I began in 2020 to stay home more, included much reference to the kindness of others. An example or two. A week or so into the first lockdown, I woke to a note from a neighbour who I'd never met and still haven't, informing me that she was going to the supermarket that evening and to get in touch if there was anything that I needed. When I texted to let her know that I was fine, thank you, she replied to say that the offer was open any time. I had managed finally to get a supermarket delivery after several attempts. When I posted about this on Twitter, I received a private DM message from a man, again who I've never met in person, but regularly engage with online, letting me know he had a friend who lived close to me who could do some shopping for me if I needed it. This experience led me to a personal desire to note small and not so small acts of kindness that I see or observe. Just a couple more recent examples. Interestingly, these are both train related, train travel being very much back on my agenda post-lockdown. I'm travelling home from Exeter to Falmouth. A man gets on at Newton Abbot and sits next to me. We get chatting about his trip to Plymouth. He is meeting up with family friends and going to a football match, and mine to Exeter. I tell him that I need to change trains at Plymouth and that the timing is tight. Let's get ready then, he says, picking up my heaviest bag. We pull into the station with 3 minutes to spare and run together to my train. Thank you, enjoy the match, I say. He smiles, I smile, we say goodbye. Lovely. I'm on an early morning train to Plymouth, no time for a drink before I left. I buy a coffee and a croissant from the trolley. I feel better, but still. On the service return trip, about 30 minutes later, I say, I think I'll have another coffee, feeling the need. One of those days, is it? The server asks. Yes, I smile. I'll have this one on me, she smiles back. Enjoy. I'm thinking now of David Morgan, who argues that acquaintances have significance in their own right. They should not be judged in terms of whether they match up to some other notion of friendship. And Keo Stark, who reflects on the importance of interactions with strangers and writes, when you talk to strangers, you're making beautiful interruptions into the expected narrative of your daily life and theirs. Since my husband John and my mum Dorothy died in 2010 and 2012 respectively, I have lived mostly happily, alone. A few years ago, I did have a couple of flirts, pun intended, with an online dating site, something I've only recently admitted to publicly, but both ended almost before they had started, mostly because I was matched with men who I had very little in common with, one of whom I was line managing at the time. I still haven't got over that. Okay. I do admit to finding the first COVID-19 lockdown challenging and was very glad when the introduction of social bubbles meant that I could spend time with my closest friends. Vanessa, who I've been friends with since I was 11, she's sitting over there, she's going to be mad with me now. Sorry, Nessa, and her husband, Chris. During the first and subsequent lockdowns, I was never without online company. Like many others, I missed the tactile affection of friends and the daily encounters and communications with acquaintances and strangers. But even so, during my time in isolation, I was mostly happy about being on my own. Thank you. I have to mention the importance of seagulls here. I was convinced that they missed us, or at least the chips. Whatever, I was grateful for and have written elsewhere, including in fiction and in memoir, of the pleasure at seeing the gull that regularly stopped by the balcony of my second floor flat during this time. This is another gull, a regular visitor to Castle Point in Falmouth. Other memories of this time include walking, writing, cooking, catching up on various Netflix box sets and watching the news. Not for me, nor for many of us, any illicit cake-fueled parties or curries with colleagues. The news was upsetting, of course. the suffering of those who were ill and those left bereaved, the hypocrisy of the claps for key workers while nurses used bin bags for PPE, the suggestions that some lives were more valuable than others, and the stories of isolation and loneliness, which I had much sympathy with, but as I've said, I didn't really share. As I've said, I miss oh so very much my loved ones who have died, John and my mum, also my dad Ron, who died many years ago in 1979, the baby that never was, whose life ended at miscarriage in 16 weeks, and many other friends and relatives. But not only did they leave me with, I think, enough love to last a lifetime, they all, in their various ways, empowered me to value my opportunities and abilities and to be comfortable in and with myself. Of course, there are ambivalences in living alone, outside of as well as whilst living through pandemic lockdowns. There are jobs that don't get done because I don't have the skill or the inclination, or I'm just fed up with having to always take the responsibility for the organising of getting someone in. So the damp patch in the corner of the living room and the whistle that accompanies every 4 or 5 flushes of the loo is my problem. I'm living with both at the moment and have been for quite a long time, and my problem alone. There are also the times when I'd really like someone else to make a drink or cook a meal or order a takeaway or change the bed, all the rest of it. I recognise too that when living with another or others, when sharing one's living space, this does not necessarily mean that responsibilities are shared, that relationships are equal, easy, safe. Research, and there's quite a lot of it, suggests that social isolation and loneliness are akin to a chronic long-term condition in terms of the impact they have on the physical and mental health and well-being of individuals, sometimes leading to increased and multiple comorbidities and even premature death. Add to this the fact that in the UK, the political austerity agenda of the last 14 years has led to increased loneliness along with other material, social and emotional inequalities, not least because of the impact on services such as libraries and post offices. Furthermore, loneliness and associated concomitants of depression, anxiety and their comorbidity have increased since COVID-19. People of all ages suffer from loneliness, and whereas some research suggests that the effects accumulate over time and being older is a strong predictor of loneliness, other studies arguing against the stereotypical view of the sad, lonely retiree suggest that younger people are less resilient when alone. Not surprisingly, though, given dominant messages, in 2018, a report from the Royal Society for Public Health found that millennials feel the most negatively towards ageing, viewing it as a steep decline and assuming dementia and loneliness to be inevitable. Other research indicates that biological age is not the main indicator of loneliness. Rather, it is often a consequence of underprivileged life circumstances, such as educational level or socio-economic circumstances. We're back, of course, to capital in its various forms here. In his recent 2024 book, All the Lonely People, Sam Carr writes that loneliness is an inevitability in life, an experience that takes various, often unexpected guises at different points and times. And from my own experience as a listening volunteer, I agree that there are many forms of loneliness and a general lack of recognition and support for this. Solitude, the state or situation of being alone, although often conflated with loneliness, is equally complex and may be a positive and or a negative experience, sometimes both at the same time. It's easy to find talk of solo livers, particularly older ones, going with the stereotype again, as coping with or learning to live with solitude. But there is also much evidence of individuals choosing solitude with freedom, creativity, and increased spiritual well-being, all viewed as benefits of living alone. As Netta Weinstein and colleagues note, across history, solitude has been more or less, mostly less, tolerated as a need or desire of regular people. When we do think positively about solitude in the past, we most likely envisage great spiritual leaders or romantic poets, usually men. Women's role as caregivers made and still makes the seeking and experiencing of solitude more difficult, as does the view that when a woman thinks alone, she thinks evil. Although this quote dates back to the witch hunts, Sarah Ahmed reminds us that just as Virginia Woolf argued that a room of one's own was something that women had to fight for, similarly feminists and women and girls in general often have to fight to acquire a will of one's own, as female willfulness is often defined as stubborn, obstinate, contrary and problematic. Note to my dearest and nearest in this room, I want this t-shirt. There are quite a few of you, so you might need to negotiate who'd like to gift it to me. This is Jane Austen quote, of course, from Pride and Prejudice. Returning to my own experience and that of others who I've undertaken research with, I'm increasingly struck by persistent messages that highlight not only my difference, but my perceived lesser status as widowed, as single, and of course as childless. Drawing on Susie Scott's sociology of nothing, these identities could be described as non-identification, non-participation, non-presence. But as Scott argues, such characterizations are created and managed through meaningful social interaction, so nothing is always productive of something, including phantoms, imaginaries, replacements, and alternatives. It is often argued that the loss of social identity and the loss of social connectedness associated with widowhood results in social death. Although this can be the case for some, for others, including myself, this is not true. Yet again and again, the message we receive is that the only happy ending is to be partnered, and the alternative results in isolation, unhappiness, even suspicion. Anyone familiar with UK television's ITV3 and the Drama Channel, both assumed to be watched more by those from the older generation, will be familiar with a mix of adverts on mobility aids, life insurance, funeral coverage, and cruise holidays and over 50s dating sites. I wonder, though, why the obsession with togetherness, as in romantic togetherness? Why the focus on sexual and domestic partnerships in a way that suggests a hierarchy of connections, of relationships, of networks, when there are so many people who live their lives differently? To all of this, talking personally, all I can say again is that although I live alone, my life is full of interesting activities and wonderful people. And I still believe that I have something, dare I say, quite a lot, still to offer to the world and to offer to others. No false modesty here, what's the point? I know that I am a person who cares for others. I know that I am a person who sometimes inspires. I know that I'm loved. I know that some of the people who love me are proud of me also. As I assume is clear by now, much of my own pleasure in solitude is predicated on the company of and care from others. Vanessa and Chris, and all the human and other than human family members who so beautifully, wondrously chose to adopt me following the death of John and my mum. Tracy and Julie, dear friends and colleagues who have each ensured that my work life continues to be rich and full, and at times joyous, since I decided to go it alone and move away from a full-time institutional job. David, Katrina, Krista, Chris, Tim, Jamie, Trude, and many others who have inspired me and so very kindly supported me in my own autoethnographic journey. Andy, who in addition to helping me improve my physical and mental health, is an unexpected collaborator, and another person alongside Vanessa who is safe to sometimes bicker with. Alec, who has quite recently become a thoughtful, caring and entertaining pen pal. The first I've ever had, never had a pen pal before. Esther, Bex, Landa, Beth, Harriet and Maddie, and many other PhD students, not all mine, with whom I have developed a relationship way beyond that suggested. in graduate school documentation. And of course, so many others, both outside of and within the academy, that I've failed to mention here. And I must just ask you to join me here in saying happy birthday to Amanda. Happy birthday! No. It is essential we look beyond stereotypical and societal expectations of the way we should live our lives to resist cultural narrative entrapments, as Alec Grant urges us to do. It is also important to be aware that our own understandings and feelings of an experience are just that, our own. So whilst I want people to understand and appreciate how I feel, I hope I can always understand and appreciate that others in the same situation will feel differently. I do not mean to deny the experience of others. I know, as I have said, that loneliness can impact very severely and negatively on some. I know too that many people who live alone experience loneliness if they do not have the opportunities to be with others in the way that I do. I appreciate that my feelings on the issue are influenced by a position of privilege and acknowledge that such positives are less likely for those who, for example, are homeless, imprisoned, or living in situations of material discomfort and insecurity. To return to care and to love, Diva Woodley, a US-based feminist philosopher and activist in the movement for Black Lives, argues that this time is a critical one for understanding how to implement a politics of care. Care here includes all that is necessary for health, welfare, maintenance, and safety. Woodley insists that when whole populations are suffering because of the ways society is structured, it matters that we have defined politics so that some voices are much less likely to have influence than others. The politics of care is therefore a redefinition of the purpose, priorities, and experience of politics away from dominant liberal, masculinist, and capitalist paradigms. A complementary argument is outlined by Bell Hooks in All About Love. Briefly put, although she goes into much more detail in the book, without justice, there can be no love. I can attribute my own personal political sense of self to many influences. My parents, who every day showed me the value of love and taught me the importance of respect for all peoples. My feminist sociological education as a non-standard higher education entrant of working class origin in my late 20s. And my second marriage to John, a long-time self-defining lefty, are all significant. So too, I think, is my non-maternal identity, reflections on which have dominated my personal and academic life for 40 years. Not long after my mum's death, I came across the work of Mary Oliver for the first time. The last lines of her poem, The Summer Day, have stayed with me. Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I've come to realise that one important legacy of the various losses in my life is the need to feel useful, the need to care for others, as my dearest loved ones cared and care for me. There are times, though, when it appears that the care that I give is seen as less valuable, less legitimate than the care of others. I admit to still feeling physical pain, exclusion, and yes, a loneliness when observing or in the company of those who claim to be doing what they do as a mother or a father for their children and or their grandchildren. I believe, although I'm not always brave enough to say publicly, and I'm very grateful to be in a space where I do feel safe to do it, that what I do for all of our children. Closing this talk, I'm aware I have not, other than near the beginning, referred to the title of the conference, the focus of our time here together. But I hope I've made it clear through both my personal stories and my critique of the dominant narratives that I believe that there are many ways in which to live our lives in splendid murmuration with others, whilst at the same time, if we choose, spending useful, meaningful, and happy time alone. Thank you.
And in the meantime, Chris, thank you for our second keynote. Yeah.
Thank you, Katrina and David and the committee for inviting me. I couldn't resist. Why would I stay on the screen? I don't know about these people. This is called Autoethnography in the Thin Places, Echoes and Murmurations Across Time. And it's a bit of a murmuration as a paper, so you may have to be a bit of a starling to follow. In Celtic, this is the prologue. In Celtic lore, the world has thin places where one might experience a disruption in the ordinary temporal spatial plane we inhabit, where the veil between worlds, realities, may be porous. The thin places may provide an entry point, a sort of portal to another realm, a realm of spirit. Going to these places can release us from the everyday world and open us up to a new world of possibility. On this trip through the UK, down into Cornwall and up into Scotland, my wife Susan and I plan to visit some of these thin places. Some say that the feeling of these places is sacred, holy, otherworldly. Now, sometimes in life we seek these experiences out, and sometimes we just stumble into them. Sometimes they're not quite places, but more like thin moments, those little bits of time that somehow seem to lie, albeit briefly, betwixt and between now and then, betwixt and between the ordinary, everyday reality we inhabit and another. We find ourselves, however briefly, engulfed in a liminal state of being. Thinking and writing about thin places and moments and liminality in general has led me to wonder about two disparate phenomena in the physical world, one largely aural and the other mostly visual for me, phenomena so disparate that they may seem entirely unrelated, and they may not be directly related to any particular place, yet here they are popping into my consciousness together almost simultaneously. One is the echo that I hear when I call across the distance, the thin trace of my voice coming back to me in little waves across space and time. The other is the murmuration, that oddly hypnotic, swirling, twisting, turning flock of starlings making waves across the sky. Both call to me, both are asking for attention, both seem to come in waves. In this keynote address, I will speak into and through the echoes and murmurations of memory, working my way across the thin places between memory and forgetting, between dreaming and waking, between hearing the voice of the muse and writing, between pausing and acting, between the sacred and the profane. Come with me as we wander across time, picking up the echoes, the traces, the murmurations of memory, and perhaps we will somehow stumble into the alchemy of autoethnography. But first, some keywords and definitions. Chord, noun, yes, the musical kind. Any harmonic set of pitches consisting of multiple notes, also called tones, that are sounded simultaneously or nearly so. Murmuration, flocking and flying into formation by a large group of starlings. I could watch those things for hours. By the way, if you don't know this, some of the hotspots are around Somerset here in England, just down the road a piece, and Dumfries and Galloway just up the road in Scotland. Echo, noun, a sound or series of sounds caused by the reflection of sound waves from a surface back to the listener, a close parallel or repetition of an idea, feeling, style, or event. Wander, verb, to walk or move in a leisurely, casual, or aimless way. Wonder, noun, a feeling of surprise mingled with admiration or fascination caused by something beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, or inexplicable. Riff, a noun, in music, a short repeated phrase in popular music, often in rock and roll and jazz. Key, noun, also in music, the group of pitches or scale that forms the basis of a musical composition. Note, noun, also in music, an isolatable sound used as an atomic building block for creating music. Side note, adjective plus noun, an aside, an extra comment, a manifestation of my off-and-on ADHD. Now, I'm no David Carlos or Katrina Douglas, though I've been slowly learning to play the guitar. I'm not going to sing you a song or play any music for you. I'm certain you'll be grateful for that. My mastery of notes and keys and chords is rudimentary at best. But I mention it here because I would sing this keynote if I could, as I pay particular attention in my writing to the rhythm and tone of words. Note, noun, in writing, a short informal letter or a short record of something that is written down to help jog the memory later. Coda, noun in music, the concluding passage of a piece or movement, typically forming an addition to the basic structure. Finally, keynote, noun in speaking, one can hope mercifully, short talk that establishes an underlying or extends an underlying theme. I've been asked to offer a keynote. I kind of like the idea. And since I also like the idea of this keynote being a letter, which for me is always anchored in a story addressed to a particular audience, that is how I shall proceed today. And maybe what I have to say today will be in the right key, may strike a chord or two. And so here is my little riff to you, my letter to you. Dear autoethnographers, I've been asked to key into a theme, or is it to ruminate or murmurate? Last year, our friend Elise Pinot offered up two metaphors for consideration, murmuration and echolocation. Her intent was to offer murmuration, and more on that in a moment, as a metaphor for conferences. And secondly, she offered echolocation as a metaphor for performance. How fortunate this is, as they say, not only right up my alley, but also directly in line what I've been thinking and writing about for several months now. For my purposes today, I'll appropriate Elise's metaphors for my own applications. Specifically, I will consider how the murmuration and the echo, part of echolocation, can stand in as metaphors for how memory and the writing that may flow from it works, or doesn't. I'm drawn to unruly metaphors. These are definitely unruly metaphors. Indeed, I've long been drawn to the improvisational, to the oddly random, to the accidental discovery, to the liminal spaces between wings and air, between memory and forgetting, between saying and the said, between an opening and what's next, between this moment and that one, between memory and story. You see, I've always thought the dominant Western culture narrative, especially as manifested in the neoliberal academy we seem to have inherited, especially in the States, gets it backwards. The institutions we work for want control and order, always an illusion. So they want us to specify our goals, construct outlines, follow the well-worn path. They want efficiency. God, they're obsessed with efficiency. They want us to travel in straight lines, but we seek creativity and discovery and newness. We want to wander and wonder. They want regimentation. We want flavor and flow. They want sameness, uniformity, conformity. We seek joy and spontaneity and otherness. They want to count things. We want things you can't count to count. Of course, it has always been the wanderers, the transgressors and trespassers, the ones who don't submit to control or force others' regimes of command and control upon themselves, that break new ground, that carve new paths, that find the golden threads that lead to something new. For example, somewhere around the year 100, alchemists embarked on a quest to turn lead into gold. It was an audacious idea. They had no specified path, no easily followed rule sets or policies or procedures to adhere to. They were in fact treading where nobody had dared to venture. So far as we know, they never succeeded, but like all greatest artists, scientists, and philosophers, they never let failure deter them. Some of them had students or apprentices, but surely they did not have student course evaluations to contend with, or workload policies, or annual performance evaluations, or any of the other appraisal kinds of things we have to burden ourselves with. I've often thought about their quixotic quest. For myself, I've been pondering something much more modest. For years, I've looked and wondered upon the alchemy of writing memory. Do we transmogrify the sometimes leaden weight of memory when we write it into new being? What exactly happens to memory when it lands on the page? Do we solidify it, polish it, strengthen it, transform it, make it completely new, return it to its roots, which are in the old impressions, the little flashes, the stories we've been told, born of, on, and in the days we reach back to? Are we transmuting fragments of lead into gold? Do we remember, that is to say, re-embody what we've known all along, though it may have been buried, embedded deep in our bodily tissue, nearly forgotten, but still there? When I asked my autoethnography students last fall to reach back deep into their earliest memories, they struggled at first, as if they had not exercised these bodily tissues, these neuronal memory paths or muscles in a long time, if ever. So I had them search for artifacts of their past, for images and objects and stories told by others. And they persisted and found some gold buried deep in there, even in the painful moments brought back to consciousness. and they crafted some beautiful stories. These days, I'm working with and writing about what I'm calling echoes of the past, the faint traces of memory that move about just underneath everyday consciousness, in and out and around. I've been wondering about echoes of the past, echoes that rebound across time through a kind of liminal space that breathes wisps of something that may have happened, images and whispers, not often complete, that emerge into my writing consciousness as I sit down to write. Along the way, it has occurred to me that these echoes of memory may be moving differently from normal sound waves. Perhaps they move across that distance in a swirling pattern, like a murmuration with soft echoes between the wings of one bird and another. And like that last faint sound of a voice echoing back across the canyon, or like that moment when the starlings turn, shifting direction, but haven't quite gotten into the new pattern yet, or like that dim moment where you try to recall a dream as you cross the threshold from sleep to awakening, I hear and see just slight traces of a message coming to me out of the abyss. It's up to me to put it all together into something new, into some recognizable pattern. So naturally, I'm playing with what it means to be moved to story that wisp into something more. Maybe I should not be surprised that I often think in echoes and murmurating swirls and fragments, that I remember only those flashes, wisps, whispers, echoes, pieces, bits, sometimes chunks, all swirling around, at times seemingly chaotic, but eventually forming patterns, like a murmuration. After all, I've always been easily transfixed in wonder, often daydreaming my way through life. Got me in a lot of trouble in school, by the way. So often these memory traces do seem to be random and spontaneous and even indecipherable, like some dreams, but somehow simultaneously they are also beautiful, organized and patterned in elegantly unpredictable ways. If only I attune my words to their movements, like a dream, like a murmuration, kind of like my life in general, a lot like my life as a writer. See, when I sit down to write, I don't plan. I just write what comes. I murmurate. I move along, seeking patterns. I've often thought that I do not choose what I write, rather it chooses me. Or perhaps it's just that I'm called to listen to whatever muses or echoes or murmurations might be speaking through my fingers on any given day. Quick side note. Another metaphor may erupt here. Maybe as you sit here sort of listening to my words, but also occupied with your own, possibly daydreaming a little bit, knowing that your brain works at a rate some 5 times as fast as the spoken word. You're all brilliant, you just don't know it. You'll hear some echoes across the time of your own life. To quote a native son of England, David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, a guy from just up the road a ways, I find it entirely plausible that, quote, the echo of a distant time comes willowing across the sand. Since I first heard that song in the 1970s, I've loved that idea of a willowing, an archaic construction meaning spreading out far in multiple directions, of a memory echo across sand. That seems an aptly diffuse way of thinking about what happens to these echoes of the past we call memories. This image speaks to me of a multitude of possibilities, of small traces and patterns spreading out rapidly across unstable ground. And sand, of course, is an unstable foundation. It follows the whims of wind. I've also have no idea why I find comfort in the instability and uncertainty and disorderliness of willowing, or of sound echoes, or of murmurations. I just do. Maybe it's just the openness of it all. And as often as not, the wind blows away the willowing pattern, only to form another and another and another. In that openness, I find hope. Hope lives in the vastness of possibility. Sometimes I find clues in the vastness of possibility that dreams bring, at least as faint echoes or waves or murmurations or willowings into my consciousness. On that note, I have this strange and recurring dream. In the dream, I discovered that our house has a hidden extra room I didn't know about. I'm trying desperately to remember where this room came from and how I got here and why I don't remember it. Despite having lived in this house for many years, I wonder, what is this place? Where did it come from? How did it get here? Why have I never noticed it? And what on earth is it for? For some reason, as I enter, I feel drawn to the center of this room. The trouble is, it's hard to exactly tell where the center is. because it's dark and the room is cavernous with high ceilings receding into darkness and walls receding into the distance. I feel a sort of presence here, though I see nobody. So I call out, "Hello!" Nobody answers. There's only the soft echo of my voice. "Hello, hello, hello." I call out again, "Hello!" The briefest pause follows as I listen for the echo. "Hello, hello, hello." Listening to the echo, I fall into reflection, mostly on the nature of echoes, which seem to me to be traces of the presence that's both there and not there, or something that's fading out, but having a hard time with it, resisting the very fading that is its essence. The sound of my voice is quickly gone, over, but in an instant is there in a new form coming back to me, even as it falls away. The echo represents, it seems to me, the presence of an absence and the absence of a presence. And then the walls sort of fall away or crumble or willow outward, and I'm in a vast open meadow under a vast open night sky, stars twinkling brightly overhead, the vastness of the universe opening up around me, and I wake in wonder, engulfed in mystery. I shake my head, and I go on about my day. But the room haunts me. I keep hearing echoes, or maybe just murmurs, or maybe I'm seeing wispy murmurations of these faint echoes. And one day it occurs to me, I really need to write about these echoes. I need to write in and to and through these echoes. I need to write about the possibilities generated by calling out into emptiness and the inevitable echoes that come back from the calling. And then maybe I think maybe the echo receding into the distance, fading slowly into silence, represents the echo of an opening that lives in the spaces between speaking and listening. Maybe the dream is an invitation to possibility. So I sat down and started to write this little riff about echoes. It's a riff about those echoes of presence heard and felt and remembered over time. It's about the echoes of absences heard and felt and remembered over time. My larger project, a book perhaps, is an autoethnography of memory and forgetting, of connection and disconnection, of presence and absence. I live a story of presences and absences, of echoes leaning into memory, of memory stumbling into story, of story tumbling headlong into dialogue. I hear memory echoes reverberating across time. I see these little murmurations as memories erupt, as stories are made, as dialogue is engaged, as people come and go, as I write my way into and through and toward the liminal spaces between voice and echo, presence and absence, memory and forgetting, story and secret, dialogue and silence, hope and despair, trauma and healing, connection and alienation. I've lived a story of calling out into the void and hoping for at least a faint echo to come back. And I wait. And eventually I do hear that faint echo drifting back across time. I feel its resonance in my bones. I almost grab hold of it, almost recognize its voice, its words, its everything, but it quickly starts to fade. I want to reach out across time and place to the source. And I realize that it's not just my voice making the echoes, but the voices of all those remarkable humans I have known and loved. And dogs. Dogs have played an outsized role in my life, mostly because dogs are better than people, but that's a subject for another essay. By the way, if you saw the video, we're surrounded by ghosts. The dog, that's my dog, Finley, that was being hugged by me in the video. I hear all their voices. I know these voices. They are calling out to me. Can I trace the echo's path from here in the present moment back to the place where it all began, the fragment of memory, a trace of something that may or may not have happened? The echo is the whisper of a trauma stored deep in my body. The echo is a piece of a story, a trace of something made possible by writing or speaking it into space across time. The echo is a line of dialogue, a trace of the divine spark that connects us human to human. The echo is a faint whisper of human co-presence, or why would I call out if I did not crave connection? The echo is the sound of my father's voice, a sound I still hear in my head and my heart years after his death, a sound I will always hear, and my grandfather's voice, so many years gone, yet always with me. The echo is the little wisps of hope that hover at the edges of despair. The echo is that thin line that separates consciousness from itself that I must step across to awaken. The echo is a nexus of possibility, a thin place of connection between knowing and not knowing. And of course, this leads me on a search, which sparks a riff I return to often, a riff written by Walker Percy, American author, whose moviegoer Binks Bowling searches for Well, let's ask him. What is the nature of the search, you ask? The search is what anyone would undertake if he were not sunk in the everydayness of his own life. To become aware of the search is to be onto something. Not to be onto something is to be in despair. This morning, for example, I felt as if I had come to myself on a strange island. And what does such a castaway do? Why, he pokes around the neighborhood and doesn't miss a trick. So I'm poking around the neighborhood, searching for some way of making some meaning from these wisps, these echoes, these murmurations, these willowings of memory. Yet this work is this work is about a search for possibility in the thinnest of places, in the faintest of echoes, in the little murmurs that ripple through my consciousness from time to time. Its story is a collage of fragmented memories, of traumatic interruptions, of faint voices from the past, of places I've stood and where my ancestors have stood, of echoes across time and toward hope. I hear echoes, and then my attention shifts and I start to see images. Some of them are images of joy and play and wonder, like childhood memories of a pickup baseball game in the neighborhood, or fishing with my grandpa, or like the first glimpse of a waterfall as I come around a bend in the trail, or like the flight of a golden eagle soaring over a deep valley, or the first time I saw the love of my life, or the birth of our 2 kids, or the mountain lake where we've spent many summer days across our adult lives. Others are not so pleasant, like a fist crashing into my nose, or my father shouting at me red-faced with rage, or like my head hitting the windshield of my car as I'm rear-ended by a large truck, or the first time I saw death. And I start to think, if the echo is the auditory metaphor and the murmuration is suggestive of the visual realm, what are they telling me? But both seem important, in the grips of memory, they also seem too randomly arranged to make any sense, but perhaps together, the echo and the murmuration can bring something new to my consciousness. Meaning, story. And as I wake, I fall into reverie, which takes me inevitably into the thin places of memory. I'm fascinated by memory. I'm haunted by memory. Sometimes I'm stunned by memory. Sometimes it comes to me on the wings of a song. Sometimes it comes to me unbidden as I open my eyes or turn my gaze or wander my world. I don't call it up. Instead, it calls me out. It interrupts me. It disrupts my being in the now. Memory is a disruptor, but it's also a story builder. It helps me lay out a pattern, a sense of my being across time. I don't often know how or why it works, but I'm about to face or who I'll be when I come through the other side. I know that sometimes there are pieces of the memory puzzle that seem intent on coming together. At other times, they seem intent on flying apart. It shows up in a faint stirring in my consciousness, or in a little wave of anxiety, or in a tiny scent in the air, or in a clue I stumble upon, or in a song lyric, or in a faint scent on a soft breeze. It appears in the middle of a conversation, or when nothing much is going on, or in a therapy session, or when I'm in the shower. I have become accustomed to these stirrings of memory. It shows up at first, at least at first, as a fragment, a flash, a whiff, a snippet, a line, a lyric, a shard of glass. I'm poking through into my awareness, often making me cringe. At first, I cannot make sense of these fragments. They just poke and prod and pull me forward. But with patience, I have found that memories can come into something other than themselves. As an autoethnographer, I know what to do. I perk up and I follow the clues. I poke around the neighborhood. I've learned to embrace memory when it comes, even when I don't like the first few steps along the path. I've learned to follow memory where it leads me. I've learned to write my way into it and through it. So as I start to write, I fall back into memory. Crash, boom, shattering glass and twisting metal, loud, blood, my blood. This time it's pouring off my forehead. What happened? And then I realize I'm sitting in the middle of an intersection. Cars are swerving around me to avoid me, horns blaring. I gotta get out of here. What happened? I shove the car into drive, shoot across the busy intersection, narrowly missing a car as the driver swerves to avoid me. I pull over, see a phone booth by a gas station on the corner. I don't know why I noticed this. I think maybe I should call someone. I'm feeling woozy. What happened? I turn back toward the intersection for a moment and see it, a very large garbage truck, lorry, you call it. I glance at my car. It's mangled, badly, totaled, I think. It's been destroyed. Just like that, it's no longer a car. And then I realize I'm in pain all over my body. Am I totaled too? Blood trickles into my eye. I reach up with my sleeve, wipe. I'm cut. I think my head hit the windshield. I walk to the curb and sit, resting my head in my hands. Surely somebody will help me. And memory swerves, murmurating through time, and for some reason this memory of a car crash brings up a memory of another crash. I'm in 4th grade. I stroll out toward the sidewalk with my friend Howard. He's a smart kid, but a little lazy. He's one of those slow walkers. So we're strolling up the street toward his house, and suddenly a kid in front of us darts across the street. I just lost my place moving like that. Yeah. Suddenly, a kid in front of us darts across the street. I look up and hear a sick thump as a car shatters his young body. There's blood everywhere. He lies in a twisted heap. His skull is oddly misshapen. One leg is askew, his foot sitting next to his head. So much blood. Then screams, the purest sound of misery I have ever heard. And then I see what, or who really, he was darting toward. His mom, who had been standing across the street, is now in the middle of the road, kneeling over his broken body, wailing. It's the first time I've witnessed something like that. And memory swerves again, and what comes up makes me wonder if my memory needs a break from trauma. This one is soft. This is one of a song, Layla, by Eric Clapton. And we are at summer camp in 1970, and I'm holding a young girl close, learning to slow dance. And another turn, murmurating across time, and I'm staring across the room at Susan over there, and there seems to be a glow emanating from her, and somehow I know this is my person. Another twist, and I'm teaching my first class ever, and I'm tapping my pen on the table, nervous as a cat, and then I'm back in the present moment, engulfed in wonder, and here you are, and there's more, but I pause. Coda, real quick. Now, of course, I'm well aware that this keynote address, this unruly, swirling memoration infused with echoes and images of the past, has wandered around a bit, much like I did in the forests of my youth. There I often got lost, but with persistence I always found my way home. And I think I may be ready to pull it together into a momentarily coherent coda, a moment of pause in the murmuration, and that liminal moment between the shift of direction and the new direction. Perhaps what we really have here, what we only ever have, is another opening, a chance to explore, to speak, and to listen, to move about freely, and maybe even to create something new, or at least something different. All this willowing, murmurating, echoing, has it led us anywhere? Are we yet in yet another liminal space? Maybe I should stop here on the threshold and we could talk about it.
Wow. I think we need another of those moments to breathe. In the past couple of years, we haven't had time for any reflections on our keynotes, but we have done really well, everybody. And
Both very well behaved.
you're very well behaved. So, yes, unruly, but well behaved. Yes, exactly. So we do have some time, and I'm thinking especially for our online colleagues. I think a lot of the people here will probably go down to a bar overlooking the Avon Gorge and have further conversations. But I just wonder if, particularly online, if there are any reflections or responses to our keynotes that any of you would like to share.
So I'd just like to thank both Gail and Chris for wonderful keynotes. Two very different keynotes, talks, but superb, moving in so many different ways. So just thank you and blessings. Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, Alec.
Yeah.
So while we wait for any hands online, does anyone in the room here any reflections? David, sorry. Sorry, Deepak, yes? Hi there.
It's actually Laws, not
Laws. Hello, Laws.
No worries. Just for Gail, really, you was just the way you portrayed your situation was just magical. I'm in a similar boat to yourself, and it just resonated so well. And I wrote down, my lack of loneliness is scaffolded by those I choose to have in my life, not in my home. And I just loved what you had to say. So thank you. Yeah. So beautifully.
Thank you, and I love that. I love your response. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail. And I think I've said to you before, I do love your work around love and the differences between loneliness and solitude, and how the solitude can move into loneliness. That's how it can sometimes be for me. And Chris, I just wanted to say it's so lovely to see you there. And actually, I felt and I guess you did this deliberately. Your whole talk was like a murmuration. The taking me to the tail and then back to the center and the moving. So thank you for that. I feel murmurated. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for this afternoon. And I was wondering, should it feel like a spiritual experience? Because I'm literally just choked. Both presentations were wonderful. And I feel choked and overwhelmed. It's like a spiritual experience. It's like being in church.
Yes, it really is like being in a sacred space that both of you made. Chris, I've always marveled at the way that you can step into the most dangerous, difficult, painful places and work your way out. And as one who works with others helping that, sometimes we forget that people need to find ways to track their way out. And I think you do that just splendidly, today being a wonderful example of that. And Gail, the gentleness of your unruliness and breaking these boundaries and reclamation about what it means to walk through the world in a sociable solitude is deeply resonant. And I think particularly gendered, because women alone, as you note, are really coded in particular ways, that it's dangerous, that you're lonely, da 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 da. And I so greatly appreciate your reclamation of not only the terms but the practice of that. What a wonderful way to culminate today's reflections in the two of you. What a joy. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise.